I'm Anna, for those of you who I haven't met. I'm a brand and social strategist. The first thing I want to do is ask you guys a question. I want you to raise your hand in the air if you're here because you want to start a podcast or you've considered starting a podcast. Everyone, perfect. And then keep your hand up if you are not sure what that podcast would be about half of you as well. So one of the biggest mistakes that people make when starting a podcast is they don't lead with intention or a really clear point of view. So I want us to flip the script today, and instead of thinking, I want to start a podcast, I want us to lead with, I have something to say. So there's nearly 500,000 active podcasts globally. That is a hell of a lot of podcasts and a hell of a lot of choice for listeners today as well. But there's a reason that if I asked you to name, 5, 10 podcasts, I'm sure many of us would name the same podcasts, even if we're not necessarily listeners. So the Joe Rogan podcast springs to mind, Off Menu, The Diary of a CEO. And the reason that these names spring to mind is because they're not just podcasts, they're actually brands. And podcasting has got to a place where it's no longer just a one-dimensional audio channel. You really need to build a brand world around your podcast. You're going to get an insight today into my taste in podcasts, so I'll let you judge whether that's terrible or not. But if you take the girls' bathroom, they have done an amazing job of creating a brand world. So their visual identity is very clearly pink. They've got an amazing branded set that really brings that to life. They have merch, they've written books, they do events, they go on tour. It's gone far, far beyond just this podcast and this audio channel. And that is essentially why I'm here today, because I don't have a podcast myself, but I do build brands every day. And this talk is not going to be about me, but I wanted to give you a quick flavor of what I've been up to over the summer with So What Strategy. We have a long-standing client that you see on the left there, which is Bubbleology. So we've recently revamped their whole social strategy to make sure it is reflective of their brand. Blanca Nino, which is the tortilla chips you see at this top there. Some of you may recognize them. So we're doing lots of in-person workshops with their team. We've also got Mike's Lemonade. I don't know if anyone's from the US here, but that's a big seltzer brand over in the US. I've recently started working with them to relook at their brand positioning and bring it up to date. And then that's also a picture of my office space in Richmond. So if anyone's ever in Richmond or in Southwest, then definitely hit me up. So today we're going to be talking about building your podcast brand, and I'm going to take you through 3 steps to do that. The first thing being looking at what you want to say. So I know a couple of you were thinking, okay, I want to start a podcast, but I'm not sure what I want to say. There's often a lot of pressure, I think, around choosing that topic or choosing that theme. And I really want to alleviate some of that pressure today. We're then going to look at how you say it. And I think this is possibly the most important part in terms of actually standing out in the market today. And lastly, we're going to touch on reaching your audience. If you were to launch a brand or a product today, you wouldn't just launch, you'd have a really clear plan of how you're going to get that product in front of people. And it's the same with podcasts. So I want you to go and, record your episode with a plan in place. So firstly, what you say. I've got a little framework that we're going to work through together. It's kind of got 2 steps. But before I tell you what that is, I wanted to say this, which is stop overthinking it. Your topic or theme of your podcast is not going to be the thing that sets you apart. We said that there were nearly 500,000 podcasts globally. I can pretty much guarantee you, no matter how niche your topic, someone else has done a podcast on that thing. The first piece of advice in our framework as well is maybe the opposite of what you've heard people say before. And what I actually want you to do is forget your audience for now. Again, a lot of people, I think, really try and craft their topic or theme around what they think people will be interested in. But I really want you to just start with you and start with what are you passionate about? What are your interests? What's something that you could talk for hours about and keep people engaged in? Or perhaps something that you know more about than most other people. And the reason this is so important is because if you want to do this podcast consistently for years to come, consistency is going to be a whole lot easier if you're actually talking, from the heart and talking about something that you're genuinely passionate about, that you want to go and record a podcast about. It's the same with finding inspiration as well. You're going to have to do a lot of reading and watching and conversing around this thing. You're going to find inspiration a lot more naturally if this is an area of interest for you. And lastly, authenticity. So from a listener's perspective, it's going to be a lot more engaging if I feel like I'm listening to you talk about something that you're really into. And that's going to definitely come across in your communication as well. If you're still thinking, Anna, I've still not got a clue, I'm passionate about lots of things, I'm interested in lots of things, I've got lots of hobbies, then what I want us to do is zoom out even further and think about your why. And this is something we do a lot with brands and founders as well. It's, okay, what is the why behind your brand? So reflect yourself on why you would want to start a podcast. Your answer may fit into one of these three buckets. Either it's a hobby and you want to kind of share your passion with the world. Maybe you want to start or build your personal brand. Or maybe you're trying to sell something. So maybe you've got a business or a brand or a service and you're ultimately trying to promote that through your podcast. I'm going to touch on personal branding briefly because it's such a kind of buzzword at the minute. Everyone and their nan seems to be trying to start a personal brand. I've had quite a few people come to me in the last year and say, help me with my personal brand. Obviously, traditional brand strategy as well. Fundamentals apply very nicely to personal branding. But the thing I always start with as well is saying to them, but why? Because it's not just, I want to build a personal brand because everyone else is. Where are you actually trying to get to with that? Or what opportunities are you trying to attract? So really try and go a level deeper with that why as well. I worked with a girl a few months ago who is a singer, but she wanted to build a personal brand around attracting motivational speaking opportunities, for example. So she knew that she wanted to demonstrate she's a good speaker. I also worked with an influencer this year who has 2 million followers, believe it or not, and didn't even do their own strategy. But if you're trying to become an influencer or a fashion influencer, for example, it's a very different kind of personal brand to if you're trying to be a public speaker. So really try and understand your end goal and your objective. The reason we need to understand this why is because we're then going to determine our role for channel. Now, a channel is anything that gets you to connect with your audience. So social media is a channel, TV is a channel, podcasts is a channel. And what we always do in strategy is determine the role for each. So within your objective or your why, you're then going to think, okay, how is my podcast playing a role in getting me from A to B? It might be that your podcast needs to be educational. Or is it purely entertainment and it's purely to make people laugh? Or is it to make them feel inspired or motivated? Giving your podcast a role will also really help in narrowing down your topic. So if you can fill out these two phrases in your mind, I think you're getting pretty close to figuring out what your podcast topic is. For example, if I was filling this out, I am passionate about exercise and the gym. And the role of my podcast is to motivate other people to get into exercise. Already, I'm getting a clearer sense of what I'm going to talk about and how I'm going to talk about it. So to quickly recap, stop overthinking it. Start with you, start with your passions and interests. Understand your why, and then define your role for channel. So we're then going to move on to how you say it. And I think this part particularly is when distinction comes in. So yes, we've said you may have a topic that there are other people podcasting about, that's fine. The how you say it is going to really be what sets you apart. So 2 podcasts here. You've got Call Her Daddy with Alex interviewing Kamala Harris last year. And then you've got the Joe Rogan podcast where he's interviewing Donald Trump. On paper, 2 fairly similar podcasts, right? 2 politicians being interviewed. But how they do these podcasts and how they do these interviews are totally different. The questions they ask, the way they connect with their audience, the way they connect with their guest as well. And that basically comes down to tone of voice. Tone of voice, I think, is often overlooked as a tool for distinction for brands, and particularly in podcasts as well. I think the tendency to just sit down and press record is quite easy, but actually being quite intentional with your tone of voice is where you can really start to do something quite different and quite unique. So we're going to break down the basics of tone of voice strategy, and that involves splitting the phrase. So you have tone and you have voice. Voice is ultimately the part that stays consistent. So this is the language that you speak, the dialect that you use, the vocabulary, and this is consistent wherever you show up. And then tone is the part that flexes. So we all do this naturally. I'm standing up here today. This is going to be a more formal tone than if you just bumped into me in the street, but probably a less formal tone than if I was in, a job interview or writing on LinkedIn. So we all flex our tone without really thinking about it. But with our podcast, I want you to think about, okay, what tone do I want to lead with? And the decision there really comes down to audience. The voice part in terms of podcasting is pretty easy, right? I want you to use your voice. It should be authentic to you. I don't want you to suddenly start saying things you would never say in real life. So make sure your voice is authentic to you. But in terms of tone, I want you to think about what's going to actually resonate with your audience and what's also going to ladder up to that role for channel as well. So is it a more educational tone or a more humorous tone? A little hack as well that we use in brand tone of voice is mirroring your audience's language, particularly if the audience is unfamiliar. So if it's not just your peers, you can do a lot of good research around this. I'd really recommend heading to places like Reddit, X, the comment section on socials, and seeing how your audience is talking. What slang are they using? What's riling them up? What are they passionate about? It's quite good topic research as well. And there's a principle in psychology called the mere exposure effect, which ultimately states that the more we're exposed to something, and if it feels familiar and comfortable, we have a bias towards liking it. So this is why if you hear language that you use played back to you, again, you're going to feel comfortable as a listener and you're going to be more biased to liking that podcast. And this is the same principle and reason why you see a lot of podcasts have repeat segments or repeat catchphrases or little jingles. All of these things are designed to drive familiarity, which ultimately make us feel more comfortable as a listener. This also plays a really strong role in community building as well. If there's that feeling that only listeners know what this word means or this phrase means, it's a really nice way of kind of having inside jokes as well. And we'll touch on community towards the end, but this is also a really nice tool for building community in that sense that you're kind of inside the club. So to recap, I want you to talk in your voice, but I want you to be intentional with your tone and research your audience, look at how they're speaking, and potentially start to mirror their language as well. You can repeat words, phrases, and segments in order to drive familiarity and make listeners feel more comfortable. Lastly, we're going to touch on reaching your audience. Like I said, you wouldn't launch a brand without a bit of a launch strategy. And it's obviously hard for me to give this as a kind of blanket statement, but we're going to talk about the basics of channel strategy, what formats you can use, and then how you can build a community as well. So in terms of channel strategy, it sounds obvious, but show up where they are. This is channel strategy 101. A lot of people wanting to start a podcast assume they need to get straight on TikTok. And don't get me wrong, TikTok is a great platform for these social cut downs and these short form clips. But if your audience aren't on TikTok, then it's a waste of energy. TikTok still, it's a broad audience, but it's still skewing younger. So if you have a 50-year-old male audience, maybe not the place to be. I'd look at something like LinkedIn. LinkedIn videos are doing really well at the minute, but ultimately show up where they are. Spend some time looking at the data. It's all out there. Look at the user demographics of different channels and see where your audience is spending the most time. I also always recommend fewer channels, but with higher consistency and higher quality. So pick 2 channels where your audience are spending time and then show up there and really build a community there. In terms of formats, I want you to make it visual. So obviously we're shooting here today, which is amazing. And this is a studio where you can get audio and visual. And I do think, to be honest, if you're starting a podcast today, in order to be competitive, it does need to be both visual and audio. This really helps for promotion, but it's the same reason that we all like and resonate with founder-led brands as well. I'm sure you've all seen Salt, for example, going around on LinkedIn. When the founders are at the forefront of the brand, you feel like you know them. And it's the same with the podcast. You want to see a face to really connect with that person and feel like you know them better. Secondly, make it shareable. So an hour-long episode, for example, a podcast episode is great, but I'm not going to be necessarily sending the whole thing round or sharing that on my socials. So you could create 10-second cut downs of the best points or best parts of the episode. There's a really good software that I use for that called Opus AI, which I highly recommend. It's very good at just taking long form content and giving you the best, like 40 odd clips from that. You could also look at pulling quotes into stills. You could look at taking the top 3 learnings, the top 5 points from an interview perhaps, and putting that on LinkedIn. But ultimately it needs to be short and snappy in order for people to want to save it, remember it, and share it. And then lastly, make it searchable. So some of you may know this, but the era of hashtags is over. Hashtags are pretty much pointless these days. It's all about keywords. So in your episode description, for example, are you making sure you're putting your keywords in there? And when you're posting your podcast clips on social, your caption should really be driven by keywords. And it needs to obviously not look too forced, but you want to get the key topics and themes that are discussed in that episode into the caption. It's going to make it a lot easier for people who are interested in that topic to find your content. And then moving on to community, it's another word that is being thrown around a lot, but it is more than a buzzword. And I think you should be super intentional with starting a community from day one. even if you've got 5 listeners, 10 listeners, I want you to interact with them and really nurture that relationship, because loyalty ultimately is gonna be what drives success. And you don't have to start communities completely from scratch. I often say this to brands as well. Brands don't really build communities. They kind of leverage existing ones and latch onto existing ones. Communities are built around shared interests, not around products and commerciality. So find brands with, audiences that already like the thing you're talking about, or find existing communities out in the world that you can partner with or collaborate with. I had a previous business in the fitness space. This is years ago. But we reached out to Lululemon, just cold, essentially. And before long, we were in their newsletter. We were using their spaces. They were giving us free kit just from asking and showing interest and showing willing. And we really had shared values with them as a business. So if you can find businesses and brands that do have shared values, it's going to be mutually beneficial. And I just think if you don't ask, you don't get. So to recap, in terms of picking your channels, show up where they are. It's super simple. Make your formats visual, searchable, and shareable, and then build that community from day one as well, no matter how small it is. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's this. Don't build a podcast, build a brand. Because a podcast is over when the episode ends, but building that brand is the difference between having listeners and having fans. You can reach me and follow up and ask me any questions you like. I'm more than happy to give advice as well. So this will take you to my Instagram, but it's at SoWhatStrat, and we are at SoWhatStrat across most social channels as well. Thank you very much for listening, and I believe we're going to do a bit of a Q&A now, so hopefully we can get a bit more specific if anyone's got particular projects they're working on as well. Thank you.